I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our next speaker, Bex Morehouse, who is the founder and director of Invigorate Spaces. Bex is going to be sharing with us and outlining what we really mean by hybrid working, along with some of the reported benefits and, of course, the challenges of it. Bex has over 20 years experience in the field and has worked with some of the world's leading global brands, such as Nike and Converse. Bex, without further ado, over to you and welcome.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the beautiful welcome as well. Listen, it's a pleasure to be able to spend the afternoon with you. It's a shame it's not as well, hopefully later on it's going to be more interactive, but I'm here today to basically talk about hybrid working, and together we're going to go through it and understand whether it is actually a heaven or hell work model. So before we get going into the slides, I wanted to just show you roughly what we're going to be covering. So we're going to talk about what hybrid working actually is. Unfortunately, there's a misconception about what hybrid working is. So we're going to kind of dig into that and find out more about it. We're going to talk about the 6 segments of workplace wellbeing. These are what Invigorate Spaces understands the 6 segments as. They may be different to some that you've seen earlier on today. The benefits of hybrid working, we're going to walk you through those for colleagues, but also for the employer. Any of the challenges that we can see, the impact that hybrid has on the physical office design. Many people forget that unfortunately hybrid working means we need to redesign the office to accommodate this style of working. We're going to talk about the health and safety responsibilities for employers as well implementing hybrid. And we're also going to go through what the data shows us around hybrid working. So is it more positive or negative from a wellbeing perspective? And then we're going to go through some tips for successful implementation. Through my work, I work with global brands, basically supporting and implementing hybrid working strategies. And so unfortunately, I've seen many things fail. So hopefully I can help you. If at the end of this presentation, it's something you wanted to roll out, I can hopefully help you implement it as successfully as possible. And then also we're going to give you the top 3 takeaways. So I love a bit of audience participation. So I'm hoping that David is going to pull up a poll because I want to ask you from all of these options that are listed, what actually is hybrid working? So I'm hoping, David, you can pop the poll up. There we go. So there's just one answer here. So I'm challenging you straight away. Let's see what everyone thinks. Hopefully you're all awake after your lovely lunch. Okay, so have we got any answers yet? Let's have a little look. So we're still waiting. Progress is still in place. So let's have a little look what we think. So 78% are saying some control over where and when to work. And then we've got freedom to choose when to work location specified at 0%. So a bit of a variety. And then also work hours fixed and work location specific at 0. Fabulous. Thank you very much. Hopefully we can pull that one down. So I'm going to just go on to explaining actually. I've led you a little bit up the garden path, I must say. So if we can drop the poll back down, if that's okay. Hopefully you're now on the slide that shows all the different types of hybrid working. So we'll carry on, but basically hybrid working, according to Leeds University, is actually 5 different versions of hybrid. So there's a balanced hybrid, a fixed hybrid, timeless hybrid, free hybrid, and also nomadic hybrid. So one of the things that we see through all of the work that we're doing is, unfortunately, there's a misunderstanding of what hybrid is. And some people think that hybrid isn't as successful, and it's literally down to the fact that we're not defining hybrid as it should be. So you'll see those job adverts which come out saying hybrid working, but actually what does that mean? So if you look at this methodology that Leeds University have pulled together, it basically shows you that it's all about choice as to when you work, but also where you work. And many of the most successful programs that we do see in operation are those ones that sit straight in the middle, the balanced hybrid. So I'll leave you guys to read that, but it's quite interesting to note that there are so many different versions of hybrid. Some work for organisations and some aren't. And I think it's around, basically the first tip is, if you're thinking about implementing hybrid, is to basically define what your version of hybrid would be. So when we think about segments of workplace wellbeing, so we've reviewed all the data that we've seen and all of the kind of focus groups and engagement sessions we've done at Invigorate Spaces to try to come up with a viewpoint around whether hybrid is a heaven or hell work mode or work model, and how we split the segments for workplace wellbeing from an Invigorate Spaces point of view is through mind, body and soul. So those are all the things that we can control ourselves. So our rest and recovery, our personal boundaries, the nutrition, obviously soul being job fulfillment, being able to show up at work authentically, etc. And then on the other side, we've got the benefits in terms of community, work and the workplace itself. So environments, experiences and culture for us, we feel are super important, and also that element of psychological safety. So when we've reviewed hybrid working, we've looked at it through all of those segments to make sure that we're giving you as good a viewpoint as we can do. So I'll just
pause you just for a moment, Bex, just so I know, a slight technical difficulty in the background. We're just trying to get the slides back up. We still have the quick poll showing. So perhaps if you just want to just take a step back and just talk us through the first point you were talking about in terms of the differences, that would be wonderful. But obviously recognizing we haven't quite got the slide up just yet.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Bex.
So I'm hoping I'll walk you through again just very slowly the 6 segments of workplace wellbeing, and please just shout if when you can see the slide, David, if that's okay. But basically, we do split it into the 6 segments. So workplace being super important in terms of environment, experiences and culture. Community being the ability to obviously give back. Social kind of psychological safety. And from a benefits perspective, obviously we've seen the advent of a lot of financial modes in terms of well-being, which has been really important. We've still not got slides, I don't think, have we?
Not yet, no.
Okay, do I need to do anything at my end just to double check?
I don't believe so. Leave it with me. I'm just liaising with the tech team in the back behind the scenes.
That's fine. So we'll keep scooting on, and then obviously we can pick the slides up after. So like I've mentioned, we look at wellbeing through all of these different lenses, and when we've looked at the data that we've managed to obtain and all the workshops that we run at Invigorate Spaces, we've come up with what we think are the benefits of hybrid working. So effectively, when we look at the benefits of hybrid working, we've tried to split it into benefits for the employees and also benefits for the organisation. So reality is hybrid working has given that balance to people that they probably didn't have before. So if you think about being able to run your normal life, like taking the kids to school, etc., picking them up at the end of the day, these are all benefits that many mums, many dads missed out on pre-COVID. They didn't get to experience those things. And so we've seen that as a massive benefit through our work. People have spoken about how hybrid working gives them that autonomy to basically live their life appropriately. We've also seen less work burnout as a result of hybrid working. So what's happened there is basically people now can effectively balance their days better to ensure that they don't burn out like they would potentially commuting into work, delivering their work day, and then going back from that. There's also less microaggressions that have been recorded. So anybody who's of an ethnic minority, has notably said that by working from home, there's less options or less encounters of microaggressions, which obviously can only be a good thing. There's also been a big call out from the disabled community to say that if you're, for example, injecting because of diabetes, or maybe you have to have adjustments to be able to work at your workstation, all of that is much easier to do when you're working from home, but also having that flexibility of also going into the office. The other benefit that we see from employees is the ability to take more micro breaks. So again, when you're in the office, it's very hard to say that you're at your capacity, whereas when you're working from home, you can manage that a lot better. And then in terms of caregiving responsibilities, anyone who has an aged mother, father, etc., or relations that they're caring for, there's again a big swathe of people that say that it is better in terms of being able to balance that. And if they get a call last minute, they can drop what they're doing if they're working from home and go and collect or support anybody that they're caregiving for. The other huge benefit is obviously the reduced commuting time. So that has saved a lot in terms of, time, but also financial savings as well. And colleagues are obviously looking forward when they do go into the office to seeing their colleagues, which again, if you were going in the office every day, maybe you wouldn't appreciate seeing your colleagues as much. And then from a company perspective, what companies are seeing through hybrid working is increased productivity. They're seeing increased company loyalty, and they're also seeing happy and harmonious workplaces. So that's really benefited companies that have implemented this. And they've also found that, especially Gen Z, Gen X employees, they're actually looking for this flexible work methodology to be able to attract and retain the best talent. And the big one as well, related to finances, is the implementation of hybrid usually means a reduced floor print. So companies are seeing huge savings in terms of real estate. So I'm going to pause there just for a moment, because I just want to double check with Stephen and the team whether we can get the slides up. I don't know, I can carry on talking through them, but I'm just conscious it'd probably be better with the slides.
Hi, Bex. Absolutely, yes, it would be much better with the slides, but unfortunately, we seem to have experienced a technical issue where we can't actually change that. In fact, all we can see is the quick poll. So if we can leave you in your trusted hands to drive us through without the benefit of seeing you or seeing the slides.
No problem whatsoever. All right, perfect. So that was obviously the benefits that we've seen from talking to people around hybrid working. But unfortunately, there's also some negative things that we've seen as a result of hybrid working. So we have seen an increase through our focus groups of loneliness and isolation. Employees, have felt less connected to company culture. And for those parents that have not been able to get childcare, or the situations occurring which mean there's children at home, unfortunately there's been a lot of chaos at home that they've had to contend with, which hasn't been easy to focus on work. In terms of learning as well, obviously that's really important from a well-being perspective, to be able to learn and grow. It makes you feel good, right, if you can keep growing your capacities, your learned capacities. This, unfortunately, we find much harder to do remotely. And obviously, not only that, but we've had people in different locations all not being able to get on the same screens and not feeling like you're together. The other big negative, and everyone saw this, and I'm sure you guys have experienced it as well, during lockdown in particular, there was a huge epidemic, and I'll say epidemic, of Zoom. And, people were using Zoom, or they might have been using Teams, and it just meant that they felt absolutely drained by the excessive amount of screen time. So that's something that obviously we need to be mindful of when it comes to hybrid. The other implementation, when we think about the physical office environment, what tends to happen is less desks appear in the new location when you implement hybrid. So that meant when people were going into the office, they were suddenly having to share desks instead of having their own desk. And again, from a well-being perspective, how do we ensure that the ergonomic setup is correct for employees if they're not always using the same desk? So that's something that we have to think about. And also that work-life balance boundaries was much harder to do if you're working from home. You guys probably know what it's like. There's always another task that you can do. And so shutting off and being regimented with boundaries, closing your laptop down at 6 o'clock when you're working from home is really hard to do. And there's definitely a lot of themes through the focus groups coming out saying that people just feel exhausted by always being on. And then the other kind of psychological one is just around people, when they work by themselves, feel like they might be the only one that's hard working, yet other people are doing exactly the same thing. But because you can't see them, you might feel like you're the only person that's really working hard. So that's something that we have to be really mindful of if we're thinking about rolling out hybrid working policies. From an employer perspective, Unfortunately, we've seen occasions where the workforce becomes totally disconnected from the bigger company. So if, you know, an individual's always working from home and not kind of ever going into the office, we can see reduced company loyalty, which obviously is not ideal. And then in terms of communicating, obviously we all know that our well-being is always high when we know exactly what's going on and when we feel part of decision making, etc. It's really hard to communicate in a kind of sporadic version if everybody is always on Teams, or however, I don't know how you guys communicate, it could be Slack, etc. But it's quite hard to communicate in an effective way when you're all in different locations and you're not all in the same physical place. There's also more cost associated with hybrid working, which the employer also... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Bex, I just jumped back in very quickly. Apologies for interrupting everybody. Just to say you can now share your screen, so you could.
Oh, fabulous. Good, fab. That's great. Thank you so much.
Apologies.
Brilliant. Well, listen, guys, hopefully at the end of the presentation, we'll be able to share the slides with you anyway, so you can take them away. But the black little circle here that you can now see is just around the employer negative impact of hybrid working that we've seen. So really the effort to train and implement hybrid working in the appropriate way, it's quite challenging, especially for HR teams that might already have lots going on already. So it's something that if you are thinking about rolling out hybrid working, it's something you really need to be mindful of. And the other big one is in terms of opportunity for growth. So HR teams have been telling me that they feel like when people are working remotely more often, it's really hard to spot talent. So it's something just to be conscious of, that if you've got people internally that might be the right fit for a new role, etc., making sure that there's still an opportunity to see the work that people are doing, even if they're working more remotely as well. So I mentioned at the very start, we were going to talk about the physical office space, because when people think about implementing hybrid, they don't necessarily think about the impact that actually has for the physical office. So these are just a couple of images just to walk you through in terms of things that companies are doing to make sure that the space is appropriate, like the office space is appropriate for hybrid working. So as you can imagine, the physical office is now more of a place where people will get together and be social. So there's a lot more advent of these kind of comfy seating areas, obviously coffee shop spaces where people can kind of find their tribe and feel part of a community. But if you look at that image on the left-hand side, the most important thing within the physical office when we implemented hybrid is thinking about the technology. So it might seem strange to have a meeting room all facing a screen, but if you know that you're going to have some people working from home, some people in the office, then obviously that's the only way that you can really obtain that kind of equity across both different environments. So these are kind of some of the changes that we're seeing, and you'll notice there's less desks. Even in these images, we're not actually showing any desks. So this is something to consider, that when we come into the office, we need to start advocating for meaningful moments, so face-to-face interactions, well-being check-ins, etc., all in the physical office space rather than just getting heads down and doing delivery work. So implications of hybrid, one of the things I wanted to call out, which is something that I know a lot of organisations unfortunately aren't aware of, is that actually if you do decide to roll out a hybrid working programme, you're actually, as an employer, you still have the same health and safety responsibilities for people working at home as you would do for any other worker. So this doesn't mean necessarily, even if you were, some people say to me, oh, well, my employer's only working at home every, a day every month. It's still considered, if that's part of your flexible working policy, you still need to make sure from a HSE perspective that you're doing the workplace assessments, that you're advising on good posture, you're ensuring that people have got adequate lighting, etc., and that you're creating risk assessments. So I wanted to call this one out because a lot of people forget that actually they still need to cover this off as part of their health and safety responsibilities. So I mentioned to you that I was going to talk about the data that's out there and published. Now, I must say there isn't actually an extensive amount of data that's out there. And I guess the reason for that is we've literally only been doing this really since COVID. So that started in March 2020. So we've only sort of got a couple of years worth of data. But I wanted to share it with you so that you've got an idea of what it actually is telling us. So this is some data pulled together from Kantar Research, and in this deck that I'm going to share with you, you'll be able to go through all the references and have a look at the data for yourself as well. But 64% of workers feel that their physical health has improved when we've added in remote working. 41% of people, if they're working from home, say they exercise more. And the one that I love here, 42% of people have said that they have more breaks when they're working from home. And that's probably because they feel they've got the autonomy to kind of have breaks and to down tools and come back to work. So this is quite positive data here related to hybrid working. And then if we look at some of the negative data that we're getting from hybrid working, this is again from the same Kantar study, but basically people are feeling a lot more isolated when you add in more remote working, and you can see that across all the generations. So it's not like this is a certain body of people that are feeling this way. This is all of the workforce that we know of are experiencing this. And the interesting stat here is around working from home has caused strain within the household as well. Some employers would consider that potentially not to be a problem, but we always think from a holistic point of view, you should be worried about your employees from a home perspective and also a work perspective. And for some people, it's creating tensions among the team members. So these are all things that we kind of need to be mindful of. And then if we look at ONS data, you can see here that in February 22, almost half of those who work from home in some capacity reported improved well-being, so 47%. I'm just clicking to the next one. Hybrid workers have better mental health than non-hybrid workers. So only 9% of hybrid workers have suffered from depression, whilst only 1.4% feel that stress from their home life interferes with their work life. And then you've got here 74.2% of hybrid employees get at least 7 hours of sleep a night, and 67.9% feel they have a good work-life balance. As I'm sure all of you on the call already know, sleep is so important to our well-being, and that's some pretty good statistics there to prove or to back up from what we can see that hybrid working is probably a good initiative. And then in ONS data from February 22, more than 3/4, so 78% of those who work from home in some capacity said that being able to work from home gave them improved work-life balance. And the last one here in terms of data, because we want to make sure that this is a balanced review of all the data that we have, hybrid working can have positive and negative impacts, and it seems to vary by socio-demographic characteristics, such as employees' work satisfaction, but also their personal circumstances. So if you can imagine, some of your younger employees may not have dedicated space at home to work from. So if they're working on the end of a bed or they don't have a proper desk setup, etc., it's obviously not going to be a good experience. But the great thing to note is if you're doing your risk assessments and following on with the correct methodology, you should be able to pick up those people and obviously encourage them to come into the office, because that's where their well-being is obviously going to be better from an ergonomic standpoint. So I wanted to give you tips around successful implementation of hybrid, because as I've mentioned, unfortunately, lots of people get it really wrong. And if you are thinking about rolling out hybrid, it's definitely something you need to do with intention. So the first tip I wanted to give you was just to kind of try to co-create it with colleagues, because if you ask them their opinion, obviously you're going to get fuller buy-in and fuller engagement from it. The other tip that I would give you is create a cross-functional working group with hybrid champions to actually consider all of the things that we've talked about and to go through all of the data and kind of have an informed decision around what style of hybrid you guys are going to implement. Define the style of hybrid, like I've just mentioned, and also consider it in terms of your company values. So by that, I mean, if you're a company that prides yourself on personal touch, bespoke approach, etc., it might seem strange to not operate in hybrid because you're not even giving your own employees that choice. So it's just something to kind of consider. And then always implement a hybrid training plan for all staff so that they get to grips with exactly what hybrid means, how they work in hybrid, etc. For example, how do you host an inclusive hybrid meeting without training? So one of the things that we would do within our company is we would roll out training to make sure that the person who is virtual, for example, would chair the meeting so that they feel involved in the meeting, not left behind, like tends to happen when you're one person sat remote and everyone else is in a physical meeting room. And then constantly assess and review if it's working. So we really encourage polls, focus groups, etc., to happen regularly when you've implemented hybrid working, so that you can see if it's beneficial or if it's not. And obviously, if it's attached to wellbeing statistics, then you can grab it really quickly before it becomes a problem for anyone working in that organisation. Ensure that the focus is always on we, not me. So some of the things that I found through implementing hybrid work programs is people love working from home potentially and then don't want to come in the office. But if we switch the narrative to say it's about how you show up for your team, how you show up for the business, then it means that that whole approach changes, and you'll naturally get people spending more time in office and at home. And then ensure you create hybrid team working charters, because the reality is not every role can be done effectively hybrid. So if, for example, you were health and safety or you're in facilities, you can't manage a building from home. It just isn't physically possible. So I think it's really important to call that out so that all employees know that that's been taken into consideration before a decision has been made around if hybrid working works or doesn't work. And always decide what activities are best done in person. I mentioned it earlier, but things like wellbeing check-ins, development reviews, training, etc., they're all things that work so much better in person and people get much more out of it. So I definitely recommend thinking about that to make sure that when you are together, you get the best out of it. So we're coming to the end of the presentation now, and I just wanted to give you my 3 top takeaways. So if you forget everything else that I've talked about, hopefully you take away these top 3 things, which is that hybrid doesn't work for everyone. The reality is, through my work, I see a lot of people swapping their heads around, looking at what other companies are doing. And I've got to say, it's probably the worst approach that you can do. You need to look at your company values, what you value in terms of what you want your employees to feel like when they're at work before you make a decision around hybrid working. I also think that you need to be really intentional and co-create hybrid working and implement a full change and engagement plan, and obviously always measure performance. So any of the change management people that might be on the call, they will know this Kubler-Ross change curve. Everybody adapts to change in different ways, and it's super important that we support all of our colleagues as they go through the changes and cover off any questions, any queries, etc., and make sure that everybody has the psychological safety to speak up if they're unhappy during any of the implementation, if this is the route you're going to go down. And then the third point is that, in summary, from the data, from the focus groups, etc., that we see in Invigorate Spaces, it is more positive than negative. The really big call out to say is it has to be managed, because obviously what you don't manage, you can't, what you don't measure, sorry, you can't manage. So you need to make sure that you're regularly assessing, not just from a team perspective, company perspective, but also an individual basis, to make sure that you're not getting any colleagues left behind. So we wouldn't want anyone sat at home, constantly working from home, feeling isolated and leaving the business. That's on the manager to make sure that we're regularly assessing that. And if hybrid has been implemented, making sure that there is that conversation, which is, we implemented hybrid, not remote, and so we do need you in the office a certain number of days a week, etc., for well-being. And like I said, most of the data shows us that this kind of way of working, it does attract and retain the best talent. People like choice and people like flexibility. And 9 times out of 10, through the work that we've implemented, if there's a proper plan behind it, it will help you create a happy and healthy workplace. So that, I think, is the end of the presentation. Just like a huge thank you. And obviously, I'll hand back to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Bex. What a fantastic piece. Really, really interesting. And again, thank you for bearing with us with all the technical challenges as well.
No problem.
Lots and lots of questions have come through, and I must admit I have struggled to kind of pull together the key ones here to ensure we maximise best use of time. Our second question was from an organisation where they referenced that their sites are a mixture of those who can and can't work on a hybrid basis, and all the focus is all about those and the benefits of those who can work in a hybrid capacity, but no recognition or option for those that can't. And that's caused this organisation a rift between teams and a bit of bad feeling. From your perspective, Bex, how would you suggest that's best addressed?
Yeah, I think the acknowledgement, like I said in the presentation, around some roles cannot happen in a hybrid capacity. And as long as we're going to have those conversations with colleagues to understand these are the reasons why we feel those can't happen, I think that's the best way to approach it, having those kind of co-creation conversations. And again, encouraging those staff members, if they feel like once a month it might be possible, showing the manager how is that possible, what can they do remotely that they can, you know, what work are they doing that they could do remotely, and to put that proposal forward. So I think it's that co-creation really, and not an outright no from an employer to say it's not possible, but having that two-way conversation, much as you would around a flexible working policy or anything like that anyway. So yeah.
Yes, indeed. No, I agree. Thanks, Bex. There was a lot of talk about the research, and that was really, really valuable. Is there any research into the impact of hybrid working on the impact on the family of the person that's working from home? Do you know?
Well, the only thing that I would say is that Kantar data did pull up in terms of home issues occurring, but again, it's really hard when you look at the data it's not concurrent in terms of digging into it. So it doesn't really say, are they living in a one-bed flat, for example, because that would put pressure, right? If you're in a one-bed flat, you've got children already, and you're expecting that space to work from a working from home perspective, it would be very challenging. So I think, in truth, the data that we have, it's not as detailed as you'd like it to be able to formulate a proper answer to that, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Another really interesting point came through, which was, can you refuse working from home if a risk assessment indicates the working environment is not suitable or safe?
So I don't know the actual proper HSE policy on that, but I would say that obviously as an employer, our whole role is to mitigate risk and to minimise risk. So I can't imagine a scenario where it wouldn't be possible, in truth, unless, of course, it was using machinery, heavy duty machinery or something like that couldn't happen at home. But if it was a normal kind of knowledge worker, I can't think of a scenario where you wouldn't be able to make that work, to be totally honest with you, unless, of course, the person asking the question might have more detail on that.
Indeed. And in terms of legal requirements to provide suitable equipment, what are those?
Yeah, so you need to obviously, so most employees aren't aware of this, but you have to provide risk assessments. So you have to do, a lot of companies do this via an online portal. So it's effectively an online portal that an employer would do from a DSE assessment, so display screen assessment, that would cover off working from home and working in the office. Companies are sending out monitors to employees at home, and this is why I talk about the potential negatives in terms of the cost to companies, because effectively you're kitting out an office and you're kitting out people's homes, and also a desk is super important. So providing those as a bare minimum, the desk and again obviously the screen are definitely things that you should be doing, along with the ergonomic chair. If the employer already has them, then obviously you can complete a risk assessment based off what they already have. But yeah, there's a misunderstanding that people think, oh, if they're working from home, then our right, you know, our duty of care is out of the window, and unfortunately that's not the case.
Thank you, Bex. In terms of the research around the impact on productivity, we see a lot of mixed findings in terms of whether it's good, bad. I think broadly speaking, it's pointing to the good. But I was curious to get your perspective on that, Bex.
Yeah, so I would say, and again, it's really hard. These questions are very hard because it's down to how the individual works as well. Some employees need a bit more kind of, these are what you need to do, and a bit more of a G up, don't they, to be productive. But the data is really showing us that on the whole, people doing the hybrid, so spending some time in the office and some time at home, they are more productive. So we're finding that the productivity is improved, but also their passion and their joy for work has improved as a result of having that flexibility. So yeah, it's just managing that isolation and potential loneliness. That's the biggest pitfall that we see through the data, that people unfortunately get isolated at home and then don't want to come into the office because they're getting themselves into spirals. So I think managing that element is the biggest risk that we can see from hybrid working.
Thank you, Bex. From your experience, what would you see as some of the really best industrial practices that you've seen towards hybrid working?
So I think basically creating a workplace that attracts people to want to come back, I think is the best approach. I think the minute you start to tell people you need to be in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's really hard because people during lockdown work from home, did it, enjoyed it, and then they feel like their freedom's being taken away. So I think getting a good balance between the two and setting correct parameters around what type of hybrid you are going to implement and what everyone is going to sign up to is really important. Because I think just saying we're going to work in a hybrid way, it's not enough detail to give people the tools and the autonomy that they need to be able to be good at their jobs. And the other, I guess, the other additional thing that I just wanted to add in there is we see through the data that most people come to the office for their colleagues. So if we're not communicating when we're going to come in, it can be a negative experience when you do come in if none of your team are there, because you feel very lonely again, but you've ended up going to the office. So I think deciding even on like an anchor day a week or something like that is a really good starting point to say everyone's going to be in on a Tuesday, unless of course, you know, heaven forbid something's going on and we can't get in. But then when you are in, it's a much more meaningful experience, and clearing your diary so you've got time for each other, because there's nothing worse than going into the office and doing, you know, Teams calls or virtual calls in the office that you could have done from home. So I think that's probably the most important thing, you know, deciding as a team, what are you going to do when you come in the office to make it really meaningful and impactful?
Lovely. I completely agree with that. Thank you ever so much, Bex. And in fact, there were two really key takeaways from my side, which I think also link nicely into everything we talked about today. And of course, everything we talk about when it comes to strategic wellbeing, I'd put those two as the don't compare yourselves to others. I loved your analogy there. You know, create what's right for your business. Yes, it's good that we should look at some examples of best practice and never ignore that, because we kind of want to know we're on the right track, don't we? But importantly, don't compare.
Yeah.
Think about what's right for our business. I love that. And I guess that second one really come up for me is that be intentional and involve and engage everybody in what you're doing. So I know sometimes we do tend to forget to ask, don't we? We can sometimes focusing on getting things done without necessarily asking. But that was a really, really key point. Bex, thank